Hey guys, it's ayebeepee and welcome back to my channel. I've got my bachelor's in criminal justice and a minor in psychology, and I'm going to say that for the next 80 videos because I'm just so proud of myself. I'm also a board member of a nonprofit in which we help friends and family of missing persons with resources such as searches, billboards, and even social media presence. So if you know anybody that needs help, please reach out and we'll do what we can. So hi, we are back with the Unsolved in West Virginia series, and this one is about the Greenbrier ghost. Now, the Greenbrier ghost is known as Elva Zona Heister. She did go by her middle name, so I'll probably only refer to her as Zona from now on. She was between 23 and 26 years old. Her mother was Mary Jane Heister, and her dad was Jacob Hedges Heister. And she had two brothers, Harold Cole Heister, who was born in 1882, and Lenny Heister, which was born in 1888. She was born in Meadow Bluff, West Virginia, and she was a very young, pretty girl. She was known to be pure and innocent in her child years, but she did end up being more of a free spirit of her time once she got older. She did have a baby out of wedlock in 1895, which was a huge no-no of that time. She was 22 and the father did not seem to be involved at all. And she just never left Greenbrier County. She grew up around Richland her whole life and she enjoyed her small farming community. And here we are about to introduce the devil himself, Aramis Scribbling Trout Shoe. He was a black-haired, blue-eyed, handsome man. He was known to be friendly and hardworking and just a charmer. He was known to be a powerful man, but he did have a temper. He was a drifter. He never stayed anywhere long. He was born in Virginia, but he was from Droop Mountain. In 1896, he came to work for James Crookshank's blacksmith shop in Livesey Mill. This was a small town about 5 miles from Lewisburg. He did want to go by the name Edward once he got to this area, but he was also known as Trout, so I'm going to refer to him as Trout. The one thing about Trout was he was married 2 times before he came to this town. His first wife was Allie Esteline Cutlip, and they had a daughter together. During their marriage, Trout ended up going to prison for stealing a horse, which is equal to Grand Theft Auto now. And while he was in prison, Allie ended up divorcing him for brutal violence. And it got so violent once that a group of men had to pull Trout off of Allie and throw him in the freezing river to get him to stop. So she got away from him. And then he was married to a Lucy Ann Tritt. They were only married for about 8 months because all of a sudden Lucy dies. And there's so many stories around Lucy's death. It's really weird and troubling. Some say she was pregnant and slipped on ice. Some say she was poisoned, and Trout himself says that he accidentally dropped a brick on her head. So she definitely died in mysterious circumstances. So before he got to this town, he had gotten a criminal record and he had 2 marriages behind him. In 1896, Zona went to town with her family. She ended up spotting Trout in his shop and she went with her family to kind of check him out, but she had ended up coming back later on her own to really talk to him. Her mom, who she was pretty close to, got a really bad feeling about Trout. She did not like him and she couldn't look up his record like we could now. She just knew there was something off. But these two were madly in love and it was so passionate and fast. They ended up getting married fairly soon. On October 20th, 1896, Zona and Trout got married at the Old Methodist Church in Livesey's Mill. They did end up moving to a 2-story farmhouse on the other side of the mountain from Mary Jane Heaster. And some people think Trout did this on purpose to kind of isolate Zona from Mary Jane because they were so close. The house was owned by the town founder, William Levesey, and it was near the blacksmith shop, so it was definitely convenient too. And they did have neighbors, Aunt Martha and Andy Jones. Andy Jones was their errand boy. He would help Zona clean, and he just became really close to Zona because he would do errands and work for her. In 1897, Zona did end up getting pretty ill. She was treated by the local doctor, George Knapp, and she did start feeling better within a few weeks, but he could never really find a diagnosis for her. But he had noted she was pretty much back to normal. On January 23rd, 1897, Trout had went to work as usual, but had also went to Aunt Martha's house sometime during that day to ask if Andy could head over to their house to help Zona with some chores or errands since she hadn't been feeling well. Andy had already had some errands he needed to run for Dr. Knapp, but he would get to Zona after. Well, Trout came to Aunt Martha's house 4 more times asking why Andy hasn't went to go check on his wife yet. And Aunt Martha said each time he seemed more and more aggressive about it. But Andy wasn't done with Dr. Knapp, so he had to finish that job first. So Andy ended up getting over there probably between 11 and 1 o'clock, and there was a trail of blood going down the stairs to Zona's body at the bottom. Zona was laying on her back with her ankles neatly together, one of her hands by her side and one of them laying on her stomach. He ran out of the house to his mom's house, told his mom what was going on. She ran to get Dr. Knapp while he ran to get Trout. Well, Trout and Aunt Martha showed up at the house at the same time, but Dr. Knapp took about an hour to get there. And in between this time, Trout took her upstairs. He bathed her and dressed her in this like nice dress that had like a high stiff collar and put a veil over her face and pretty much got her ready for burial, which was weird because the men did not do that during this time period. It was the women that got the dead ready to get buried and, you know, look nice for the wake and funeral. So the doctor did try for a second to resuscitate Zona, but there was no hope, and Trout just wanted to end the examination right here. Dr. Knapp did what he could to examine Zona, but Trout was just hysterical, crying hysterically, holding her head, rocking with it, crying like losing it. Trout just wasn't letting Dr. Knapp talk. Anytime he would say something, he would go into these wails or he would interrupt him, or it was just a lot. But then Dr. Knapp was looking over and saw a little bruising underneath the collar. So he went to look farther, and that is when Trout lost it. Started screaming at him, told him no one was touching his dead wife and that he needed to leave right now. So Dr. Knapp ended the examination and left. So he claimed that she died from everlasting faint, which now means heart attack. But for some reason, he changed it to her dying in childbirth. But there was also no signs of her ever being pregnant. He never diagnosed her as being pregnant or said anything about that. She never said anything about that to anybody. So that just was really weird how that was just thrown in there. So 2 men that were friends with Zona did offer to go tell her mom for everyone, and that was decided that was okay. It did take them a while though, because Zona's mom lived on the other side of the mountain 15 miles away in 1897. So when they told Mary Jane about Zona, she handled it angrily, like she knew this was going to happen, and she said immediately the devil killed her. At the funeral, multiple people said that Trout was acting really weird. He would go from being very upset, like super sad to being hyper energetic, like off the charts. He wouldn't let anyone around her coffin, really didn't want anyone around her at all. And he tied a scarf around her neck, claiming it was her favorite one and that she would want to be buried in it. And he placed like a pillow and like a rolled up sheet or blanket on both sides of her head because he said it would make her more comfortable. But then when she was buried, he refused to take the sheet home with him. So Mary Jane said, I'll take it. And so she did. And when asked, several people at this funeral said her neck did seem very loose, like not supported like our necks, right? Like it just seemed off. But Zona was buried without anyone being charged in a crime around her death. Most people still just believed it was everlasting fate. And she was buried at Soul Methodist Church and Cemetery. Mary Jane just knew something happened to her daughter, whether that's motherly instinct or she just knew. And so she prayed all the time for God to give her a sign. Give her a sign something happened to her daughter. And she was not going to give up on that until she got some answers. So this sheet she brought home from the funeral started having this really bad odor. She was just like, let me wash it real quick and get it out of the way. So she washed it and the water turned blood red and then it faded into pink and then it just went clear again. And she pulled the sheet, the white sheet, out of the water and there was a pink stain on it now. So there was not much she could really do with that. So she just started praying harder and she prayed every night for 4 weeks that God would have her daughter come back to her and tell her what happened. And one night, Mary Jane Heaster had the first of 4 dreams or visions. She doesn't believe it's a dream, but that's the closest of what it sounds like. And she had the first of 4 visions at night. The first night, her daughter came to her through this like bright light and she came to the bedside and asked her mom to scoot over so she'd have room. She told her that Trout was extremely abusive and he was mad that night because she didn't make any meat for dinner. She had tried to explain to him that she had made plenty, that there was bread and butter, there was preserves, there was applesauce, and just multiple things to choose from. But that's all she really got that first night. And then the second night, the same exact thing happened as the first night, but she ended up adding that when he was mad at her, he squeezed her neck so hard it popped at that first joint. And then the third vision happened that third night, and the same thing as the first 2 happened again, but she got a lot more in detail this time. She said she yelled for him to come eat and that he scolded her for not having any meat prepared, and she had told them they had plenty, numerous things to choose from, and that he got really mad and went to her. But when she raised up to try to get out of the situation, he grabbed her by both sides of the head and jerked really hard, and that it dislocated her neck when he did that. And then the 4th night, the same exact thing happened, same story of the first, second, and third happened, but this time she bent her head all the way around to show her mom that her neck was completely dislocated at that joint. But welcome the Greenbrier ghost. So Mary Jane went and convinced a neighbor and her brother what happened to Zona and what she told them, and they were like, we have to tell somebody. So they went with her to report it to the local prosecutor. Mary Jane told the local prosecutor, John Alfred Preston, about her visions, and at first he was definitely hesitant and just kind of, yeah. But then something about Mary Jane and her demeanor telling this really started to convince him to look into it. So he sent some troopers out to start re-interviewing people, and he went to Dr. Knapp himself. He ended up showing up at Dr. Knapp's house to ask him about the examination. And Dr. Knapp did say, listen, her husband was hysterical. I could barely do anything. So no, we didn't get a good examination and you should for sure look into this. So he was able to get her body exhumed on February 22nd, 1897. And this is when they performed a 3-hour autopsy in a local schoolhouse. They required Trout to be at this autopsy, but he pretty much downright refused. He ended up going because he knew there was no way out of it, but he was resistant. He acted fairly weird. He whittled at a stick the whole time he was there, and for the most part seemed completely unconcerned until they got to her neck. And when they saw Zona's neck, they were able to prove that it was dislocated at the first and second vertebrae. Her windpipe was completely crushed, and all the ligaments in that area were torn and ruptured. And there was bruising around her neck in the shape of fingertips and like a handprint. And there were just a lot of signs towards strangulation. So Trout was arrested fairly fast. So Trout was arrested for first-degree murder and was held at the Lewisburg jail until trial. He actually was really positive and happy in jail. He claimed he was completely done grieving over Zona, and he openly explained that he wanted 7 wives by the time he died, so that was just his 3rd. And he said he knew he wasn't going to get sentenced for this because there was no way to prove it was him. On June 22nd, 1897 was Trout Shoe's trial. There was lots of people that testified against Trout in defense of Zona. And the defense even tried to pick Mary Jane apart about these dreams she had, and that she was visited by a ghost, and you know, all the stereotypes around that. But she stood strong on her story, and it actually pretty much backfired because the fact that she was so passionate and courageous with her story, it made the jury believe that she was visited by Zona. So then on the 6th day, Trout tried to take the stand, and he was very defensive, kind of all over the place, and pretty much said everyone was just out to get him. The jury only took about 1 hour to find Trout Shoe guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison at the West Virginia State Penitentiary. But he ended up dying 3 years later from an epidemic that went through the prison that was the flu or something like the flu, and he was buried in an unmarked grave in the cemetery, which means none of his family would come and claim him. When he was sentenced to life in prison, there was a lynch mob that formed that was very mad he was not getting the death penalty, and they went to hunt him down because they were going to kill Trout Shoe. Trout was terrified of this. He couldn't even tie his shoes. He was so scared, and they had to hide him somewhere in the forest. That way this lynch mob did not know where he was at. The deputy sheriff of that time was able to calm these people down, but 4 of them were charged later with this incident. But Mary Jane Heister was just so happy to know what happened to her daughter and see Trout Shoe put in prison for the rest of his life, no matter how long or short that was. She felt Zona finally had justice, and she did end up dying in 1916. Zona's dad ended up dying the year later. Most believe that she was never seen again after her mom saw her those 4 nights, but some people say they have seen her walking around the cemetery. And there is a historical marker right in front of the place she's buried, and it reads, "Interred in nearby cemetery is Zona Heister Shoe. Her death in 1897 was presumed natural until her spirit appeared to her mother to describe how she was killed by her husband Edward. Autopsy on the exhumed body verified that The apparitions account. Edward, found guilty of murder, was sentenced to the state prison. Only known case in which testimony from a ghost helped convict a murderer. But that is all I have on the Greenbrier ghost. Have you guys heard of this before? But thank you guys so much for watching. Like and subscribe for me, and hit that notification button. That way you're notified the next time I upload. I also still have the GoFundMe going for Crystal Young. If you haven't watched that video yet, please go watch it so you know why her mom needs this PI so bad. And I still have stickers for sale. They're $2 each. And all proceeds go to the Cold Case Foundation, so it is for a good cause. And thank you guys again so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!